We have 7 attendees with 8 attendees with us so far.
Cool. Right, is everyone ready? Shall we start? Okay, excellent. Thanks everybody for joining us in our online planning advisory committee meeting of the 16th of July. If the meeting has to be halted for any reason due to technical or other reasons, the minutes will be posted on our website as usual. Please be aware this meeting is being recorded and streamed live. If you do not agree to this, please leave the meeting as soon as possible. For all attendees are invited to ask questions, and please indicate on the chat board if you wish to, you can ask your question on the chat board, or if you would like to ask your person directly, please indicate and we will enable you to ask your question directly in live. And once you've spoken, we revert back to being an attendee. If you don't want to speak, you can just put the question on the Q&A board, and Rachel will be monitoring the Q&A board and ask the question on your behalf. We'll then move to councillors, etc. Councillors, usual, if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand so that I can see, and the question will be answered. Jane is here. Jane will clerk as normal, and Hannah will take the minutes as normal. I think that's it for that. So without further ado, agenda item number 1, questions, comments and information from the public and councillors. That refers to things that we're not going to be discussing tonight, which is obviously the list of applications and Saxon Vale as per the agenda. Nothing? Excellent. In which case, move straightly on to agenda item number 2. Apologies for absence and any declaration of members' interests. Have we got any?
We've got apologies from John Nelson.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think the agenda was sent out slightly wrong, so we're actually going to switch around agenda items number 3 and number 4. So
Andy has his hand up.
Sorry, Andy, didn't see you.
Hi, Steve. Sorry, yeah, I've got a declaration of interest on one of the items, but I can't actually figure out which one it is. It's the application in the name of Dakin.
Yeah, it's number 329. Is that flat 1, 2 Bath Street?
Yeah, I've got a professional relationship with the applicant, so obviously I'll need to recuse myself from that conversation.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Andy. Anything else? So yeah, as I was saying, we're gonna go straight to item number 4 on your agenda to agree the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of June 2020. Hopefully, councillors, you've seen the minutes. In which case, can I get someone to propose that? Thanks, Anita. Someone to second. Thank you, Mark. And all those who agree, if you could vote, please. Thank you. Andy, I'm guessing you weren't at the meeting, is that right?
Yeah, I wanted the meeting, so I'll abstain.
Okay, Andy, thanks very much. So moving on, so item number 4 is now to consider the amended plans for Saxon Vale, which is reference 2019/1180 OTS. We have Luke Cleary and Simon Gate here from Acorn, who will be given a presentation. So, Luke, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Can everyone see that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So thanks for the invite. Obviously, we're keen to the Saxon Vale development still happening despite the challenges over the last few months. So this was an opportunity just to recap on a couple of the updates to the application, which you're commenting on shortly. And it's a bit of an opportunity just for a bit of a Q&A. If there's any queries that you have, then obviously myself and Simon will answer those this evening. So just a brief recap on the updates to the planning submission. The master plan's been updated. The main items there are changes to the Garsdale Avenue, the boundary of Fisher's Brook. The trees are being retained and the buildings are being moved away from that boundary. The building adjacent to Western Warehouse, the abattoir building, the height has been reduced, which is picked up in the parameter plan, which we'll have a quick look at in a minute. And also obviously at Garsdale Avenue, the parking has been relocated so that it's more pedestrianised and more pedestrian friendly. On reflection from comments from the Town Council, the disposition of uses parameter plan has been updated. This shows that there's an increased opportunity for commercial space along Garsdale Avenue. We see that as a positive thing. Obviously, it gives us the opportunity to create more jobs, and it also means that we've got less rigid zoning as we move through from the public square, where the majority of the commercial is located, through to the residential area. So that would be ground floor commercial along the main Garsdale Avenue route. Also, which has been submitted was the Bioregional Sustainability Report. This is something we're really excited about. Bioregional are an industry leader, so to have them on board advising us and outlining all the positive environmental and sustainable features which are designed in is a really positive thing. So that's a really good document. And then also there's been ongoing conversations with Somerset Highways, so they've come to a conclusion now. The main change recently was the Vicarage Street access, which was designed to allow cars in to park 6 parking spaces. That's been reverted back to just a pedestrian and cycle access only. The master plan, I might refer back to this if anyone got any questions and we need to use it for reference, but that's what's obviously submitted back in June. This is the uses parameter plan. So the change here is the brown shaded area. So this shows extra flexible commercial space along Garsdale Avenue. It equates to around 15,000 to 16,000 square foot. So it's a significant increase, and obviously the aim there is to create as much vibrancy in the new development, which links through and complements the existing vibrancy of the town centre. So that's something that we want to deliver, but it will be subject to obviously people being interested in taking up the space. The last thing that us in the local community will want is a lot of empty shops and offices which are unoccupied. Just touching upon the updates to Garsdale Avenue. So this is a zoomed in extract from the master plan. The road has been designed to accommodate HGV vehicles. Obviously there's deliveries which go to Marks and Spencer's in Iceland, which is a couple of times per day. At the moment that goes down Vicarage Street, which clearly has never been designed for HGV vehicles. So we see this as a really positive thing to take those vehicles off of Vicarage Street, which is very tight and obviously frequently used by the school children, to bring it through the site. So whilst we have to deal with the technical constraints of bringing those vehicles through the site, we want to emphasise that this is a pedestrian-friendly area. So there's change in surface treatments, there's raised tabletops to limit speeds, and there's a couple of designated pedestrianised areas where crossings where there's road narrowings as well to limit traffic speeds. So I know that there's concern that this road effectively bisects the development and cuts it in two. But we are very keen to make sure that this road is very much a home zone area, and we're controlling speeds through various measures and including signage to make sure that pedestrian and bike users feel safe. A slight change from previously, this crossing to the west has been moved off of this junction. So as people cross towards the play equipment and the Riverside Park, that's been moved off the corner so that people have got better visibility up and down the road, and they don't have to look over their shoulder to see if there's any traffic coming. A significant change, I suppose, over the last few months is something that the District Council and obviously the Town Council are very keen on in terms of promoting bike and walking. Obviously, the economic, the environmental and sustainable vision for the future is obviously a lot less car movements and things. So this was just a diagram to demonstrate what we're proposing for Saxon Vale and how that plugs into the wider context. So outside of the site, you've got these orange lines, which are the only dedicated cycle paths within Prüm at the moment. I know there's an ambition to do a lot more, so that'd be really positive. But within Saxon Vale, we propose these two cycle-only lanes, one on the north side, which is the high side, so that you don't have to come down the hill to then come back up the hill. You can stay on the high side. Or there's another route proposed for the public open space down by the river, which would link through to the existing Fisher's Brook cycleway. So they're dedicated for bikes and pedestrian, they're vehicle free. And then obviously, aside from those two main routes, there's other routes through the site which are pedestrianised and bike friendly, although they're not dedicated vehicle free as such. And then the last diagram we have is sort of highlights the wider permeability. At the moment, the site, as you'll know, is effectively a no man's land. It's a big hole in the town. So once the proposal come forward, we're looking to change that drastically and bring about a lot more permeability. We've obviously got the bridge which crosses the river to Rodham Meadow. We've got the pedestrian and cycle route up through to Vicarage Street. And then we've got the numerous links across the site. So I think that'd be a vast improvement on the existing situation. And I think that's it for today. I wanted to keep it brief. I'm happy to answer any questions. And my colleague Simon might want to add anything that I've missed off.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Luke. I would like to emphasise we are tonight just discussing the alterations that have come through and not the wider Saxon Vale project. Is that correct, Jane? Is that the right terminology that I'm using? Thank you. Paul, shall I hand over to you now as deputy and our Saxon Vale person?
Do you? I mean, I think first we need to invite questions on Luke's presentation.
I had a look. There doesn't seem to be any questions coming through from members of the public at the moment. Therefore, I'll ask any questions from councillors. Anita.
Yeah, thank you, Luke, for that. Can I just clarify something? The area that you've set aside now for what looks like potentially extra commercial space, am I right in thinking that those are the shared dwellings where you would live above and have a retail outlet underneath?
No, they're in addition to those dwellings. So we call them the live-work dwellings, where you have a flexible use on the ground floor and live and accommodation above. Right. The additional brown hatched areas are just additional flexible commercial space, effectively.
Okay, so my concern is, I guess, with the areas that are the live-work dwellings, how can we be sure that these will be taken up by people who commercially would like to use them commercially, rather than taking over the dwelling and just turning it into another whole residential area? That's the concern, I think.
So I suppose it's a valid concern, but what we were hoping is that there's the type of people that gravitate towards Vroom would see that as a great offer and a great thing to make use of, I suppose. So there's no guarantee it will form commercial space. That's why we've not included it within our quantum of commercial. So it will be a little bit of a test to see if there is uptake for it. We think there will be uptake for it. And obviously, if it proves to be something that people want, then we can do more of that in the second and third phase. But just to be clear, it's outside of the minimum 45,000 square foot that we are currently offering. So the live work is in addition to that 45,000 square foot, and the brown shaded area shows an area of up to 15 or 16,000 square foot.
But when you say it's flexible commercial area, in what sense? I mean, is that actually going to be taken up purely as commercial space?
Effectively, we're yet to know. So whilst we're talking to some commercial interests, there's a limit to who will make a sort of a formal offer as such until we get any planning permission. So at the moment, it's a bit of an unknown, and that's why we're keen to keep it flexible. We don't want to just guarantee or commit to something that we just don't know if there's enough people out there willing to take up that space. So that's why we talk about it being flexible.
So
if I can add to that, Anita, if I can add to that, on the purple hatching, the area on the ground floor there will be left to what we call shell and core. It'll be kind of a big space with kind of concrete blocks around, and it won't be fitted out residentially. There will be services provided there, so that's encouraging people to take that space and do as they see fit. That could be making that entirely commercial, or it could be having commercial to the front and an element of residential to the back, or it could be an element of retail to the front and a workshop to the back. We're trying to leave it as blank as we can, so that we don't dictate or try and guess what the market wants and get it wrong. That's the basis of trying to have that space as flexible as we can. On the brown hatching, that space there, isn't connected to the residential above. It has no kind of relationship. It's a separate access. And we're hoping there that the ability there will be that if there's a take up on that, then people will see to use that accordingly. So they're two kind of slightly separate. And what we're trying to do with the purple hatch is trying to still, while that might be commercial on the ground floor, we're trying to make sure that it has a residential consent as well, because it makes it more mortgageable. It's easier with the residential mortgage to buy that whole element. If you kind of make that mixed, it's very difficult to get mortgage on that. And that's why on some other developments where you have live work and people start off trying to provide live work, the mortgages become very difficult, and therefore it tends to fail slightly.
okay, thank you. Yeah.
If I could also add that having an apartment fronting Garsdale Road on the ground floor is not particularly attractive.
Okay, point taken. Can I just ask one final question? When you talk about not having an indication of what the likely uptake might be of these commercial spaces, how much have you guys sort of liaised with the likes of the Chamber of Commerce and people like that to get an understanding of what the requirement might be?
We've liaised with the Chamber of Commerce all through the process, Neil Howlett, and we've been in contact with them. We've also done a marketing exercise locally and regionally. We've gone out to a number of parties. We've produced flyers. We've put it on websites. And whilst there has been some interest shown locally, it's very difficult for a business at the moment, any business, to commit to taking some space that is probably, first of all, planning has to be achieved. And as we all know, that's not necessarily a given. And then build has to be done. So any business at the moment that we've talked to have expressed that they would like to be here, but it being 2 years away, that doesn't really fit into their business plan. And therefore, they've kind of said, if we can make some progress and we know that there's a spade going in the ground, they'd like to come and talk to us. But until then, their businesses can't see that far ahead.
Okay, thank you both.
Okay, anyone else? Paul?
Can I just kind of follow on from that with some questions? I mean, firstly, as you just said, Simon, there's a mix, there's a kind of flexible use spaces and there's live work spaces. That's right, isn't it? And how does the mortgage work on the mixed use, the shared live workspaces?
So I just try and clarify, because I can see that sometimes I get confused with it as well. So let's just trying to clarify what we mean. So the purple hatching, that's a bit hard to see, but the purple hatching, which is nearest to the high street, nearest to the silk mill, that's intended to have an element of workshop, sales frontage, and it can connect to a residential apartment above. So that has that flexibility of kind of being live work. So you could have an apartment and commercial beneath it, and that'd be one unit.
And the mortgage can work on that in some way.
Yeah, and so what we're trying to do through the planning process is trying to classify that space as having commercial residential, and therefore we believe that will make it more mortgageable. If we just go residential and commercial, then you've got to almost kind of get two mortgages, and it's very, very difficult for someone that can't kind of prove their business or how that would take forward. So that's what we're trying to do with that. Is that clear, Paul?
That not a lot clearer, to be honest, Simon. But I mean, what I don't quite understand is if that works there, whatever the approach is, why does that approach not also work on Garsdale Avenue?
We've done it there because it's going to be quite a lot of ground floor commercial space, and it will have a big area to fill. Whereas the area along Garsdale, we see that being slightly kind of narrower. The accesses that will be for Garsdale Avenue for the residential probably won't be off of Garsdale. They'll be from a higher point because of the slope on the site. So we don't really want them connected. And what we're trying to provide is a variety of product. But the great thing about trying to do things in phases is that we'll be able to see how successful that the phase one element is, and we'll be able to then kind of see what we should be doing along Garsdale. The reason that we said let's have some flexibility is so that we can do that. I don't necessarily envisage that the whole of Garsdale in the brown hatched area will be all commercial. What we could see is an element of residential and an element of commercial. What we're trying to see is what the market will want and have that flexibility.
Can we just clarify, because I'm slightly confused as to what's going on Garsdale Avenue? You're saying the ground floor is separate from the rest of the building on Garsdale Avenue?
Yes, it's one building, but access is from two different points.
Right. So and it's therefore potentially two different owners. So
yes, that's a good way of describing it, Paul. Yeah. Right. On the live work, it can be one owner. On the brown hatching, there will be a commercial owner and a residential, two separate.
Right. Okay. And then the ground floor will have a flexible planning use clause, which means that it could easily switch between a ground floor flat, as you say, or a shop or a cafe without having to go through planning.
Yes, that's what we intend. And what we hope to do is that we would hopefully elevate that in such a way that the frontage could be used for either, or there would be minimum elements needed changing to accommodate that.
Okay, great. Can I just a quick follow-on question? We talked about 45,000 square feet of non-residential. But as far as I recollect, we don't have any idea of what the square footage of residential is. Are you able to give us that?
I can, Paul. I'll come back to you in a couple of minutes with that answer.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh,
Can I just ask one other question, either to Simon or to Luke? The bridge. I mean, maybe to Luke. Luke mentioned the bridge a few times there, which is fantastic. I just wanted to check: have we now got a commitment to the bridge? Is that going to be? Are we committed to that? Are you committed to that under this planning application?
Yeah, we've always been committed to it, and we can see the benefit to Saxonvale and the wider community. So, but obviously you'll appreciate that when we get to the detailed design phase stage, we will have to speak to obviously the Environment Agency and the Highways Authority and the ecologists and things. So, whilst we want to deliver the bridge, there's going to be some challenges to get all of those parties who potentially are going to pull in different directions to reach agreement. So what we've always said is we'll write that into the section 106 as a commitment. We genuinely want it to happen, but we're just conscious that there's a lot of detail to happen and a lot of consultation.
So okay, so you because this is the same response we've had for the last however many months. You haven't actually had those conversations yet. You're saying you're holding off on those conversations.
We can't have the conversation because it's a detailed design matter. So it's effectively, we can only tackle it later on. At the moment, obviously, you'll appreciate we're just purely talking about quantum of development and access to the site. So, but
this is access, surely. The bridge is access, quite an important access, in fact.
Yeah, but not in Somerset's view. So obviously, the vehicle access is being into the actual site, so that how we can inhabit the site, how we can get vehicles into there and build the site, and that's being discussed and what we're hoping to agree approval on. And then in terms of obviously the detailed site design, I suppose it touches upon the conversation we just had about the commercial and what does Garsdale Avenue actually look like. Well, that's very much a reserved matter. So we something we can tackle then. So we've got our own vision and something we've discussed with the architect and what we're trying to sort of communicate at the moment. But obviously we're very keen to get that to that detailed design stage where we can actually show you what this might look like, where we can talk to more commercial tenants and put some more meat on the bones, as it were. And that's very much the same for the bridge. So the outline establishes the principles for the development, but there's a huge amount of work to go so that we can communicate to yourselves and the community what Saxonvale is going to look like.
If I can add to that, Paul, we will need the Environment Agency approval, which will take some negotiating. And as you're aware, and I've previously mentioned this, is that the bridge eventually will have to be some form of compromise, in that we will have to compromise with what the Environment Agency want, how we can deliver pedestrian access, cycle access, disabled access, buggy access from level platforms. We also then have the issues of not being able to build in the flood zone, which is pretty much the green area, as you can see. And also the ecology of the area, which when we did the tour with local people, something they feel very strongly about. And then on the other side of the bridge, as you know, on the lane, there isn't a great landing area in terms of area, so it will be difficult to do. But we believe that it will improve the site in terms of permeability, access to the cheese and grain area, to cycling. So people keep saying, well, why do we want to do the bridge? And the reason we want to do the bridge is because it gives us access to Rodham Meadow, it makes the cycling better, it makes the development more attractive. ultimately makes our apartments more attractive and sellable as well. So it's in our interest to do that. It doesn't. It's not a bridge that doesn't go anywhere. It links up nicely.
Well, absolutely. I'm surprised that who's questioning it, the bridge. I mean, probably not anybody locally, is it? I'm sure.
Well, lots of people. Different people want different things from the bridge, you know, and that's the issue. In the same way that people want different things from the existing planning application that we have. And
just to clarify, also that you mentioned Section 106 in relation to the bridge. So, you're saying that the bridge will be provided as your kind of commitment to the community, as a kind of an extra, as it were. It's not part of the development. It's your payment to the community, if you like, for being able to develop in this, or part of your payment.
I think if you want to phrase it like that, Paul, I don't have an issue with you phrasing it like that.
Okay, but I mean, it's interesting that it will actually, as you say, add value to your properties, that bridge. So in a sense, you're having your cake and eating it, I guess you could say. But anyway, that's for others to.
Well, that's the nature of it, Paul. I suppose you want the best development, and we also want the best development. The reason we mention the 106 is because people are very dubious that we're going to deliver it, and the only mechanism that the planning authority has, as you will know, is to either write it into a contract such as the 106, which obviously talks about all of the community benefits, including the education contribution, which is significant. It's about £1 million for this development alone. Or the other way that the planning authority can deal with it is via a condition. So it'll be for the planning department to work out how they hold us to account effectively. But that's the only reason we mentioned the 106 is trying to give you some comfort that we are serious about it. There's no hidden agenda, that's just trying to give you a bit of comfort, really.
Section 106, as you know, Paul, is a legal contract which we will be party to.
I mean, personally, I mean, I'd feel even more comfortable if it was committed to as part of the outline planning application, and as part of the development, rather than necessarily under Section 106. But that's an ongoing. Did you manage to get that information, Simon? 230,000
square feet of residential.
Okay, yeah, so it's kind of significantly more than the non-residential, isn't it? What? So I mean, I guess we're looking probably to one assumes what 500 to 600 adults possibly in that space, you know, as living in the Saxon Vale.
Could be, yes.
You're right. And how many jobs do you think will be created in the non-residential space? 200, 300 max?
I think we're thinking somewhere around 450.
Okay, that might be optimistic, but yeah, 450. So it's still less than the number of residential. The point being,
I think the point there, Paul, is that and if we're going to go back over items that have previously been discussed, which I'm very happy to do, is that trying to fixate on a quantum of commercial, in my mind, is perhaps how people used to think. Certainly with what I've experienced over the past few months and the way that people are moving forward, and in terms of hot desking and co-working, what we're trying to provide here is a sustainable development where people will have the ability to work from home. Our designs will be able to accommodate, as I'm lucky enough to have at the moment, an element where I can sit down, and I'm not in my bedroom, but it might be a small desk that's part of a room, but we should be looking to design that in. And with our commercial element as well, we are looking to have a co-worker element to that will produce more jobs, hot seats, people using that. So we think we're providing some really good quality space, rather than being fixated on a number or an element of commercial, which just ends up being empty shops and things. So that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, maybe that's.
Thanks, Richard Ackroyd. You had a question?
Yeah, hi Simon and Luke, thanks for that. I just sticking on the section 106 for a while, because I'm one of the people who really wants to see a footbridge across that river. Now, if I suspected that the section 106 would be issued as a lump sum of cash later as an afterthought, well, as has happened actually in a lot of developments in the area, and then that money for whatever reason never gets spent and the project is abandoned because it's later found out to be, you know, not viable or not possible to do. That would seem to me as a bit of a letdown, and I'm quite taken with Paul's point that you know, why isn't it part of the outlay? It should be. It's transport, it's foot transport, cycle transport possibly, but it seems to me that it should be part of the outline application. So rather than a question, I'll just say to any district councillors who are listening, make sure that that is in the contract that you pass. Jane.
It is in the outline. It should we gain outline planning approval, it will be in the outline in the section 106.
Okay.
The section 106 is part of the outline.
Can I just bring Jane in at this point?
Yep, sure.
Thanks. I mean, Rich, I presume you're referring to the bridge down at Southfield Farm.
I don't want to embarrass anybody.
Yeah. so the section 106 in that instance allocated a sum of money for the bridge to be provided. What I'm not sure about is whether Simon and Luke are suggesting that rather than them just providing a pot of money for somebody to provide the bridge, whether the section 106 requires them to build the bridge as part of the development.
Yeah,
it's a subtle difference, but I think it will answer the question.
All right, thanks Jane for that clarification. Just one more point. I heard from one of the planners, district council recently, that there's an opportunity to gain a bit more social housing or affordable housing on the development. How close are we to getting that? The figure I heard was 27%. Are we any closer to that? Do we know?
I think that there's probably been some miscommunication there from what I can understand. It's been previously mentioned when we first started in this process through the media that we were looking to provide a minimum of 20% affordable, and that's still approximately where we are. There are different kind of mathematical things to be done, but I think it would be false of us to say that there will be 26% affordable homes.
Okay.
That is incorrect.
Okay, that's very clear. Thank you for that. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions from
Just to finish off on Jane's point about the 106, the proposal is to deliver the bridge. It's not a financial contribution, which is dependent on other people. So we'll pick up 100% of the cost and implement it effectively. The only mention of the section 106 was effectively to try and give people comfort that we were serious about it, because it is a legal document. So it's obviously for the planning authority to write that into the approval, or write that into hopefully the approval. So that would be, yeah, it will be both things. It will be part of the approval, but also part of the 106, which is the legal detail, the detail of any major application, which will cover everything, including the affordable, and including the education contribution, the off-site highways improvements. So it's a significant document. So we just mentioned that as to try and give people comfort. So apologies if it raised suspicion.
Okay.
Thank you. Just going back to Simon's description about the flexible uses of the building, it may be just because I missed it, but as you all have seen in our report, we were quite specific about how we felt the flexible uses should operate, because it wasn't clear from the information that has been submitted as part of the amendment that that's actually how they would work in the way that you've described them. So it might be helpful if, just to provide clarity, and again to give people a bit more of an assurance, if you were able to set out in more detail how you envisage those flexible uses will operate as you've just described to us. I think that would be really useful.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is Luke and myself will have a conversation on that, Jane, just to kind of see if we can show that. I suppose in my mind it seems fairly clear because of the topographical nature of the site. And I know that's been a kind of a question as to whether the brown hatched area would have a separate access to the residential.
Yeah.
And I think we'll probably be able to kind of clarify that. And we'll also have to have a look at answering that question in the right angled bit of brown hatching that's on the flat part. That will probably need some clarification as well. So I think we'll have a look at to see what we can probably add to that, and maybe we could show a section or something.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Anita?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thank you, Simon, for clarifying that element around the social housing, because I too was under the mistaken apprehension that, or mistaken belief that we were a lot higher up than the 20%. I know we're only talking tonight about the amendments, and forgive me if this is the wrong time for the question, but I would quite like to ask a question of John Clark as amended councillor, how this now sits still with the 30% aim that Mendip has, rather than the 20% that's being delivered. I just wondered, John, if you might have an answer for that. Is John still with us?
He is somewhere, yeah.
He is, but he can't speak.
Can't speak.
He can.
I've just promoted him, so he should be able to.
Oh, okay, there he is. Yep. There's John.
Anita, thank you for the question, but I can't give too much information because we are bound by strict non-disclosure agreements, which have recently been reinforced because of the comments that was made at a meeting by non-green, including myself, councillors. So I think, as my understanding, as Simon has said, they are looking at 20%, and he can confirm that. Any other above that would have to be negotiated, I suspect. The Homes England money that was given, and I'm not Homes England, sorry, there is also a proportion taken off that 30%, which is allowed for within planning regulation. And I think Jane can confirm this in terms of the, what's it called, empty buildings premium?
Credit, vacant buildings credit.
That's the one. So I think that takes off, legitimately takes off in terms of planning rules and what the planning committee can consider when considering the application. That can remove 5%. So it's legitimate for the developer at this stage to not only say that they can put, they're talking in terms of 20%, but actually in terms of increasing that. At the moment, unless there's further negotiation, either with Mendip District Council officers and decision makers around the financial outcome of this development and what they wish to retain for themselves for various reasons, then we may have to negotiate up to 25%. But at the moment, as far as I understand it,
I must say it just feels very undercover, doesn't it, really? The whole idea of non-disclosure agreements on something like this, which is pretty important if we're trying to make sure that Mendip delivers 30% or however that turns out. I just wonder, how does it sit with you, John, personally, without disclosing anything? Does it sit okay with you?
No, absolutely not. There is a dire need for social housing, not just in terms of affordable market priced housing to buy, but social housing. And I'd like to see far more social housing on the site, rather than affordable housing, which is for sale, but at 80% of the market rate, I think it is.
Yes.
So my ambition would be to see totally social housing for rent on the site, to be honest, but that would impact on the outcomes for both Acorn and Mendip in terms of their return, I suspect.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you for putting me in that position. like to word it very carefully. You make notes.
Thank you.
You did well, John. You did well.
Yeah, well answered. Well answered. Any other questions from councillors? Lizzie.
Hi, on a different topic, I was really pleased to see the report that you'd got from Bioregional about sustainability on the site, and it recognises some of the things that you've already put in place, which are really positive, and then there's a whole set of recommendations towards the end of the report to suggest how things could be improved even further along the One Planet Living guidelines. And obviously One Planet Living is enshrined in our neighbourhood plan. So I wonder what the situation is with that in terms of those recommendations and those improvements, and how those will transpire in what you eventually do.
I'll tackle that one. Thanks, Lizzie. So in terms of the recommendations at the end, effectively, this is something that will be reviewed at the detailed design stages. So obviously the good thing about the One Planet Living is the holistic approach to sustainability, which for the most part we can get on board with. But then there's a few technical elements which require us to work up what the materials are, how much glazing there is, before we can fully commit to the sustainable offer as such. So because we're right at the start of the process, and we haven't even designed a building as such, we were trying to use the bioregional report to demonstrate how much we are trying to commit in terms of our ambition for the development, without being a bit over the top and overcommit whilst we're right at the start of the process. So the recommendations include some really good points, and it's definitely something which obviously we'll look to do as much of when we work up the detailed design.
Great, thank you. I'll keep an eye on that when it comes through.
Luke, could you just add with regards to the work that you've been doing, not you personally, but with Peter on the microgrid and stuff?
Yeah, obviously the town council started the process with the microgrid, and obviously we're assisting them with that. The appraisals which they're working up, which hopefully we'll see the detail of soon, is using Saxon Vale as the model effectively. So it's an interesting and exciting piece of work. It's referenced in the bioregional report. It's obviously a positive and ambitious vision, so it's a real positive thing that we're working with the town council on. But obviously it comes to a point where you have to take it to the next level and put it into reality. So we're very keen to get through to the detailed design stage so that we can make all of these things happen. But whilst we're talking about the sort of broad principles, we can't realise any of this exciting stuff. I suppose people get fixated on a few of the negative bits, and there's elements like the microgrid which people forget, and it gets overshadowed a little bit. But yeah, there's some positive things happening, and we've been working closely with the town council on that. I'm not sure if Peter's closer to it than I am. My colleague deals with it more than I do. I'm not sure if Peter wanted to update anyone on the microgrid. I'm not sure if now is the time, but it's an interesting piece of work.
Thanks. Peter, do you want to?
Well, I think the reality is that the final report hasn't yet been published, and we have another meeting of the working group later this month, after which that report will come out. But essentially the proposal is both for a microgrid that makes use of solar energy, which is then stored to the benefit of the community at Saxon Vale. And also the proposal is a heat network. As you'd imagine, the aim really is to make Saxon Vale as sustainable as possible from the point of view of energy generation in the future. But the full detail will come out probably either later this month or early part of August.
Great. Thanks, Peter. Any other questions? Richard?
Yeah, it's just another general one. I mean, sort of knowing that our district councillors are all silenced by a non-disclosure agreement, one of the things I'd like to see, and I heard another off remark, whether or not that was not supposed to be told or whether it was true or not, was that no viability assessment has been done for this site. I actually think it would be in Mendip's interest to publish some of these costs and actually come clean with how much it cost them to buy the site. Frome Town Council did that when we sold ours. So this is not really a question for Luke or Simon, I don't think particularly, but I would really welcome a bit of openness and a bit of honesty. I find it quite, it's quite difficult now to make a decision on some of these things if I know that our district councillors are not allowed to say what they really think. It sort of feels a little bit odd, and that's not the fault of Luke or Simon in that, but because I actually quite like an awful lot of this development, I have to say that, but it puts a funny taste in my mouth when people have been, not allowed.
I think if I could add to that, Richard, and hopefully Jane might be able to add to this particular point, is that the vacant building credit takes approximately 5% off of the 30% required, which takes it down to 25. So at the moment, we are 5% short of being policy compliant. And if there is something we could do to narrow that gap, we would do that. And so providing 20%, which equates to 60 homes, is where we currently at. And I think we'd all agree we'd like to provide more, but the viability that we currently are working through prohibits us from that. And I will say, and I will reinforce, as I have done to Paul and Peter many times, that the land payment that Mendip made to Frome Town Council had a requirement that on that land there should only be 4 homes provided, which equated to 7%. And that decision was taken. If at the time Frome Town Council had dictated that on their land it had to be 20%, then that would have equated to an approximately 2 or 3% more homes. But the town council would have received a lesser receipt for their land. So I don't necessarily have an issue with that, in the money that Frome Town Council have received, they will use for the benefit of Frome and for the good ventures that they want to be doing, including being involved in the Western Warehouse, which we see as a very exciting project, which we've welcomed Frome to get involved in. We've tried to work very hard to find a way of discounting that sale to the council, because we would like them to occupy that and offer a cultural offering to that particular quarter. They are all things that have to be considered. So whilst I understand that everybody would like more affordable homes, decisions have been made to try and make a viable outcome, in the same way that you made a decision to take a greater receipt for the benefit of community projects for Frome.
Yeah, I think the point is, though, Simon, is that Frome Town Council are open and published what we got and the decision that we made, and yet elsewhere there's just this non-disclosure agreements and vagueness and greyness, and no one can get to the bottom of the numbers. So if someone came out and said, these are the numbers, this is why it's only 20% affordable housing, at least we could have that discussion. At the moment, we just don't know.
I think that if you were to be minded to, you can find out what Mendip paid for the land, but obviously the viability element of that, I understand you don't have access to. Mendip don't have a viability at the moment. Obviously, it's something that we continue to work to, and I believe that Mendip just said it, that they are not prepared to release that element at the moment, and that's our stance. So we have to agree to disagree that at the moment there is a 5% gap between us, which equates to 15 homes.
Thanks. Paul.
I just wanted to clarify something you said there, Simon. You suggested that the secrecy and the non-disclosure of figures, etc., is purely down to Mendip. Does that mean that Acorn, as a business, are actually quite happy to release this information?
No, we have said that if that information was released, we would be concerned it would be commercially sensitive to us.
So even if Mendip were happy, you wouldn't want them to release it anyway.
We have put comment back to Mendip to say that we don't think that's appropriate.
Okay, so yeah, that was my original understanding. I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Sure.
Rich.
I just come back to you on the sale of Frome Town Council land. It's 1/8 of the whole site. So if we sold it for, I don't know, 25% social housing across the whole site, you still wouldn't be anywhere near 25%, because you're talking about 1 or 2 houses different. And I thought we sold it for a minimum of 20%. That was the agreement, but I'll go with you. It's a long time ago.
Thanks. Jane, Charles.
Thank you. So I've heard all the discussion and the information that Luke and Simon have provided around the additional flexible uses. And I suppose this is a question for councillors and perhaps Peter, if you'd like to give an opinion, but has what you have heard made any difference to our proposed response, where we're saying that a minimum of 1,500 square meters should be added to the non-residential offering? Has what you've heard changed your thoughts on that proposed response at all?
Any comments from anyone?
Take it. That's. Oh.
I mean, sorry, Nisa, I'll just jump in. I mean, I think it goes back to what Rich said. Without knowing the actual numbers and knowing the full stories, it's very difficult to actually sort of say whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, that's my view. I mean, yeah, the little tweaks and changes look positive, but to me, it's just difficult to get my head around if this is a good deal or not, because we're only got sort of so much of the information. My view. Anita.
Yeah, I think exactly the same, Steve, really. And I was just thinking, potentially there is seemingly more commercial space in the area, but because the take-up of commercial space is an unknown, is it really providing what we've asked, or it could turn into residential? I mean, it just feels a bit loose and a bit vague, that's all.
Paul.
I kind of, to answer Jane's question more specifically, I welcome Simon's and Luke's clarification of that flexible use space this evening. I think, as Jane suggested, if we could have some sort of, written or graphic kind of clarity around that, that would be really useful. However, our current response, which we're going to go on to, does acknowledge the addition of that flexible space. I mean, we've known about this for a long time, since you presented it at our council meeting, whenever that was, 6 months ago or something. So, and in our current response, we have said that we welcome that. So, and again, in a sense, what you clarified tonight certainly would increase that appreciation that's there for sure. But as we've also said in the report, it's still not enough. It's still not a mixed use space, as Simon has demonstrated by a huge amount of residential space in relation to the commercial space.
Thanks. If there's no other comments, shall we go on to, oh, sorry, Rachel.
Hi, there was just one other comment from Giles Vallis, who wanted to say, as a member of the public who lives on the outskirts of Frome, I would reinforce and support the requirement to ensure a pedestrian cycle bridge between the development of Willowvale and Willowvale is made a condition of the development. As we inevitably move toward having less cars in the centre of Frome, pedestrian cycle links have real importance in improved connectivity between different parts of the town, making the town for people rather than vehicles, and ensuring each new development in Frome is properly integrated into the urban grain around it.
Thank you, Giles. Hannah.
We also have two members of the public with their hands up. We've got Stephen Swells and John Clark. Did you want me to allow them to speak? I think Stephen was first. Are you happy for me to put him as a panelist?
Yeah, yes, please. Hello, Mr. Swales. Mr. Swales, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, he's on mute.
You're still on mute.
Okay, should we go to John first? No, I can't either. We'll go to John first.
John Clark, Hannah, and we'll...
Yeah, here we go. He should be on his way.
Oh, John, you're on mute as well. There you are. Great.
I know it's going back a bit. All this about viability and disclosure. I think, as Simon says, a lot of this information is being considered commercially sensitive because I guess it impacts on the ability of Acorn to actually maximise the site for themselves and for others. So I guess that's part of the question. As far as I'm aware, the cost of the land is the only bit that which was £6.3 million. The only thing we've been told with any great clarity at the moment is that money will be recouped. Now, I may be wrong in disclosing that, but I understand that's public knowledge as well. That can be public knowledge. So, but can I just say, Mick Dunn and myself have been pushing for some time to get greater clarity about the financial position in terms of the viability of the site, because it needs to be viable for Amended District Council in terms of the community. And I'm not just talking Frome, I'm talking the wider community. That's the viability of the site as well. And that means financial return for the whole community, not just Frome. But also, obviously, it has to be viable for Acorn to proceed through all the phases. And one of the things that concerns me is that this is phase by phase. So it's great to see this increase in commercial live work. It's nowhere near the amount that is being asked for. But again, my concern, I must say, is that at the end of phase one, particularly in light of what's been happening recently in terms of pandemic, that may change. So there is we need to be honest about this. There is no guarantees from anywhere that what is being said now will go right through all the phases of the development. And Luke might want to come back on that, but that's my belief anyway. So, thank you. Let me speak.
Can I just bring in Mr. Stephen Swells, because I know you wanted to ask a question, and I think you're unmuted now, sir.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know the technology. I wanted to ask about the exit onto Vicarage Street. We were very pleased to hear that it's going to be a cycle track and a pedestrian way. But when you read in the notes, it is very confusing because it's also saying that there are 6 parking spaces that are going to be there as well. And I've just wondered where these 6 parking spaces are going to go. But it's in something called reserve matters, which I don't really understand. Does that mean that later on they can just change their mind, decide to put it back as you know, for 6 cars to drive up there?
Jane, do you want to jump in on that, or?
It might be better for Luke or Simon to confirm, but my understanding of the plans was that those parking spaces for the properties that would effectively have been at the end of that track will actually, their parking spaces will be accessed via a different route now. But as I say, it might be better for Luke or Simon just to confirm that.
That's correct.
So that's definitely the case, even though it's been kept in reserved matters, and those parking spaces are still being shown on the last map that you showed in the presentation, and I couldn't see any other exit other than onto Vicarage Street.
The amendment, Mr. Swells, just makes that particular access as stated for cycles and pedestrians, and the car parking provision that comes with those homes in that square will have to come from the main site.
And that's definite.
That's what the plans are stating. Yes, that is what we want to do in the outline. That is how we will access the site.
And even if it's reserved matters?
That the reserved matters don't have the ability to change the access.
I see. Thank you. The other thing is that parallel to Vicarage Street, just behind where those parking spaces should be, I think it's changed from 2 stories to 3 stories, and neighbours, you know, who went to the presentation down by the silk mill said, oh, well, that's all right, it's going to be only 2 stories, it won't affect us that much. But it seems now in the plans that those are so much nearer the garden, you know, the back gardens, nearer the house. In one case, a 3-story building, which is only 15 metres away from someone's house. And the people who live here don't really know. It is quite difficult to, everything's to us, because we're not experts, seems quite contradictory.
Mr. Swells, if I can chip in, it's Luke from Acorn. We spoke after the last Broome Town Council meeting. In terms of the story heights near your property, that hasn't changed. The location and the heights haven't changed. The only story heights which changed were the ones next to the silk mill. So the existing abattoir building, the owners of the silk mill were keen to retain the heights of the existing silk abattoir building.
Yeah.
So we updated our plans to show that. In terms of the whole planning process, obviously we're right at the start of the process. So as this is outlined, we're only considering the amount of dwellings and the access to those dwellings. The detail, such as the scale and massing, will be, it's called reserved matters, but it's effectively the detailed design. At that point, there'll be full elevations, there'll be full slab levels, so you know where the ground floor is in relationship to the existing ground level. So there'll be a huge amount of detail, and there'll be sections which show your property boundary and your neighbour's boundary and how that responds to proposed dwellings. And then obviously that's the start of the process of the planning process, and the planning authority will have to review that and make sure that what we're proposing is sensible. So I'm trying to give you some comfort there that there's a huge amount of detail to follow, but we haven't changed anything apart from the access next to your house, which obviously you're pleased about removing those cars. So I think that's a positive thing.
Okay, well, so we will keep that green strip for the animals.
The area we don't need for pedestrian and bikes will definitely be landscaped, because it's obviously looks nice and it's good for the biodiversity.
Right, thank you.
Paul, did you want to jump in?
I just wanted to clarify something there for Mr. Swells, Stephen. I think I'm right in saying, maybe Jane can correct me if I'm wrong, that as Luke says, the detail certainly will come at reserved matters time. However, there are a number of plans submitted for the as part of the outline planning application, which show building heights, etc., etc. Although one might say that's not a kind of a concrete fixed plan, if you like, at this stage, they certainly will set a strong precedence, and actually changing that in the future would probably be quite difficult. So if you feel that building heights are too high at the moment, if they go through an outline planning permission stage, theoretically we can change it later, but the reality is probably that we can't. Would that be right?
Mm-hmm. Thank
you. Excellent. If there's any more questions, oh, Rachel. Just my thought.
Rick Swan has a comment. He says it's a shame Nash haven't committed to a maximum building height in meters. Then at least we would know. At the moment, the south side of Garsdale Avenue could still be over 16 meters according to their story height statement.
Okay. If there's no more questions, I think we should move on to our proposed response and recommendation. Jane, shall I hand over to you at this point?
Oh, Rachel's got another hand up.
No, sorry, it's for a comment for subsequent application.
All right.
Can I just respond? Can I respond to John's point before we leave the meeting?
Sure.
So obviously the viability is a big issue which has obviously been discussed at length. And whilst we can't speak for obviously the district council, and I can't go into the detail, and quite frankly I don't know the detail. I mainly deal with the design side of things. To give you some context without baffling you with numbers and a financial report from a commercial agent, the site is obviously laid empty for a long time, and that's because it's very expensive to develop. The planning inspectorate, who's a completely independent body and is obviously highly regarded within planning, they make the final decision on any appeal decisions. In 2016, he effectively changed the local plan to say that any commercial space on Saxon Vale is non-viable. People don't make any money from it. So therefore, Saxon Vale should be unburdened from delivering any commercial space. So the offer of a 45,000 square foot minimum, plus live work dwellings, plus the 15,000 flexible space, which we've just discussed, is a really generous offer. And obviously you can't take my word for that, but I'm just trying to put that into some context which is easily understood. And then just touching upon the affordable, you'll know there was a previous permission on the site, and on that permission there was 11% affordable approved. Again, that went through an appeal process, so we're at 20%. We're trying to do more, but those two things hopefully just put the site into context. It's a great site, great location, but it has its challenges, and that's why it's laid dormant for a couple of decades. So that's the narrative, and unfortunately I can't give you any further detail.
Okay, thank you. Lizzie.
So can you just clarify, because I wrote a note earlier of something that was said about the 15,000 and then heard something different, so crossed it out. So now I have to rewrite my note. The 15,000 flexible is in addition to the 45,000 and the live work units, just to be absolutely clear for my brain.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sheila.
I do recognise this site is actually a complicated site to develop, but there's lots of reasons why it hasn't been developed in the past, not just because it is a tricky site. Access has always been tricky, but various other things have been problematic, and that's nothing to do with the actual site itself. It's to do with who owned it and the complexity of who owned it. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's not entirely the site that is the problem, that was the problem rather.
Thanks, Sheila. Rachel.
We've had a couple more comments. Rick 1 has said the consent was only for part of the site, and Helen Kay has said there are costs of land remediation. She is happy to raise the section 106 matter and the bridge with Amended Plans.
Great. Okay, thank you. If there's no other questions, I'm going to go to Jane for our proposed response and recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
I'll go. You'll have all seen the proposed response in the report. I'll go through it under each heading as quickly as I can, just to check that from the discussion that you've had tonight and what you've heard from Luke and Simon, that whether you're happy to agree with that response. So if I start with the access road, we have said that the access road still divides the site into zones as per our original objection. It should be noted that this hasn't changed. However, we welcome the addition of the central median strip and the widening of the bends, and support the detailed design being secured by a planning condition that will contribute to achieving a low speed vehicle environment and a safe and convenient pedestrian routes. We also support the revised arrangements for access off of Vicarage Street to serve 6 car parking spaces, becoming access for pedestrians and cyclists only, and the agreement to limit vehicular access to the site from the top of Vicarage Street. And I didn't have this in the original report, but you may want to add that we also welcome the dedicated bike routes and the moving of the or relocation of the pedestrian crossing. Okay, thank you. Then we move on to building heights. And we're proposing that we welcome the reduction in height. From
Sorry, can I just jump? Sorry, just going back to the access road. There's just a point of clarity really, because I haven't got the plans in front of me, but in our response we said the last sentence was, and the agreements to limit vehicle access to the site from the top of Vicarage Street. Was that the parking that we were talking about, that access, or is that a different access?
That's a different part, I think.
Okay.
I believe.
Okay. Because the word limit, because what Luke was saying or Simon was saying earlier, there wouldn't be any vehicle access from Vicarage Street to the parking, but this we've got the word limit, so I just wondered if it was that.
No, I think that this is the element where traffic will be routed through the main road through the site in terms of the heavy vehicles, rather than them having to go down Vicarage Street as they currently do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
It's probably the way I worded it. Sorry.
That's fine.
Thank you. So then we move on to building heights. We welcome the reduction in height from 3 stories to 2 of the proposed buildings at the location of the current abattoir building, together with the allowance for the partial undercroft to the buildings along Saxonvale. Okay, then we move on to the flexible uses. We've actually included the travel plan in part of this. This bit's a bit longer, so bear with me. We welcome the fact that non-residential uses will be expressed as a minimum amount, and the addition of the potential for flexible ground floor uses on Garsdale Avenue. The flexible units will have the most benefit if they include the provision of an independent access to the ground and first floors. The plans need to clearly state that the ground floor and first floor will have separate access, and it must be confirmed that no planning permission will be required to switch between the uses. The flexible units must be sufficiently conditioned as part of any outline approval to ensure that they are brought forward in any reserved matters. So that's the first part. Then we go on to say, whilst we welcome the inclusion of the flexible units, there is still inadequate provision of non-residential space. Saxonvale is by far our best opportunity to create more work opportunities in Frome town centre, and thus begin to address the problem of commuting out of town and reduce car use. The current proposals appear to be providing for greater residential occupancy than commercial and non-residential, thus adding to the problem of commuting instead of beginning to address it. Sorry, next page. Then we talk about the travel plan. The travel plan suggests ways in which commuting could be reduced and is aspirational, but this is still missing the big point that we need to provide more work opportunity in Frome so that people don't need to commute elsewhere. We would want to ensure that the travel plan sets a baseline target of 50% or higher for, 50% or higher is set for residents for trips to work by car on their own. In addition to communicating regularly with the resilience manager, which is stated in the travel plan, we would ask that all monitoring reports should be shared with Frome Town Council so that we can ensure the targets are being met. A minimum of 1,500 square metres should be added to the non-residential offering, and all of this should be available to rent or buy independently to the residential dwelling. Ideally, we would like to see Mendip buy at least some of the non-residential space so that it can be let to small startup type businesses at a low cost. We need affordable business space as well as affordable homes. And if everybody's happy with that so far, move on to the last element, which was the bioregional assessment. We welcome the comments from Bioregional and would like to see a condition as part of any outline consent for a commitment to implementing the recommendations of that report and to further strengthen performance against the principles of One Planet Living. The amended plans do not address our previous objection for the provision of 30% affordable housing for the development. The amount of affordable housing provision needs to be confirmed. Until then, our previous objection still stands. I finished by saying, whilst all the amendments have moved a little closer to something more acceptable, given the comments above, and until those objections are dealt with, this is not an application we can support. Having listened to the discussion, I think it would also be worth just adding to that response that we would also like to see the provision of the bridge committed to through the Section 106 agreement. So if everybody is happy with that as a proposed recommendation for our response, I would need councillors to propose and second that, please. So that's proposed.
I'm proposing.
Okay.
And second, please, Richard.
Second, Richard.
And all those in favour?
So that's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Over to you, Steve.
Yeah, well, thanks everyone, and thanks Luke and thanks Simon. I'm sure we'll have more discussions on this. I think now we need to move on to the other applications under consideration tonight. If everyone's happy with that. Jane.
Thanks everyone.
I was just going to say, please don't feel obliged to stay if you aren't necessarily interested in the other applications. We won't be offended if you choose to leave the meeting now, apart from councillors, of course.
Thanks, Luke and Simon. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Good night.
Sorry, I've just got to change papers. Right. Rachel, sorry.
I'm just wondering whether you had seen Giles Ballas has asked whether it's possible to bring the penultimate item 330, shop 8 in Baker Street forward if the running order can be amended, because he has an interest in that.
Okay. We did say that we would look at number 8 Lansdowne Place, number 324 first. But after that, we can look at item 338 Baker Street, if everyone's okay with that. Great. Excellent. Jane, would you like to introduce item number 324?
Yes, Thank you. So councillors may remember that this is an application that we saw previously, and that application for the extension was refused. We had recommended that it be refused, and it was on the grounds of the fact that it would be overbearing on the neighbouring property, to the detriment of the impact on the residential amenity of the neighbouring property. The amended plan, the description is still for the erection of a single-storey rear extension, replacement of garage with associated works. I should note that Maxine Crawley, who is the ward councillor, has sent in a note just to say that she is happy that the revised plans address the previous refusal reasons, and she would like to support that application. And I also know that both Steve and Paul have been to visit the site, so I think it would be useful to hear their comments on that visit.
Sure, I'll go first. I'm sure Paul can add in. Yes, Mr. and Mrs. Willis were very accommodating. They talked us through the plans, and they have changed in terms of the overbearing and the roof line, to the point where personally I don't think they impact on neighbours at all. And I think it would be a very good addition to the property. And the current extension, as Mr. Willis showed us and explained, is really not fit for purpose as it is. So I think this would, I see no reason to object, and I actually support the application. Paul, would you like to add anything?
I mean, not particularly. I mean, I think I agree really with what Steve said. I think it's heartening to see that since the previous application, the applicants do seem to have had some dialogue with the neighbours who originally objected, and have revised the detail. I mean, it's essentially the same extension, but just revised the detail of the roof line, etc. And now I believe that the neighbour doesn't have an objection, so in which case there's no reason why we would object either.
Yeah. Jane.
Sorry, I should point out, just for the benefit of the attendees, that all councillors have looked at the plans for all the applications online prior to joining this meeting, and have advised me if they have any comments or issues on the plan. So it's just really to reassure you that just because you don't see us showing the plans on the screen, they have been looked at in advance by all councillors.
Thanks, Jane. So without further ado, I'm on this particular, and I'm going to propose that there's no objection from Town Council. Someone second that for me? Thank you, Mark. And if we could vote on that, please.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
So are we now moving on to 330?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So this application is for the shop at 8 Baker Street, and it is for the repair and alterations to the shop front and some internal alterations. You may be familiar with this as Williams Butchers. They need to reinstate the shop front. Obviously, sadly, it was subject to an arson attack. They have said in the accompanying statement that they want to incorporate some of the previous detail that was perhaps covered up from the shop front. And the main difference is that the doorway will be widened. The reasons for that is just so that it is actually wide enough to accommodate modern day use with some of the equipment that they need to get in and out, and will make it more accessible for disabled people. And I don't think there's much more to say. I haven't had any objections come forward from councillors regarding this. So over to you with any comments.
Any comments from anyone? Rich and then Lizzie.
Just to say, I know we all know it was a tragic accident, the burning down of the frontage and everything, but I think this is a very sensitive and sensible, I don't know if it's the word is restoration or refurb, whatever, but it seems to me eminently sensible to widen the door to allow modern mobility scooters in and everything else. I think it's a really good idea, so I like it.
Thank you. Lizzie?
Absolutely, and mine's probably not even a planning thing, but it's just to say it's really lovely to sort of see it bouncing back into use, and you know, to rebound so positively from something so horrible. It's really positive and a good news story for Frome coming out of something quite sad.
Indeed, it's good to see a business trying to get back on its feet, which is excellent. Any other comments from any councillors? Andy?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, again, with it being in a conservation area, I tend to sort of defer to the expertise of other people, but I was happy to see that Rick and Civic Society were happy with that as well. So I think all round it looks absolutely fine to me.
Okay.
Would you like me to propose a?
Please do.
Yeah. So we're pleased to see a sensitive and sensible restoration to this property, and we welcome the shop being brought back into use.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Someone proposed that for me. Thank you, Anita. Someone second it. Thank you, Sheila. And we'll vote on that, please. Excellent.
That's unanimous. Thank you. The next application that I think we would like to discuss is the application for the garages at Dyer's Close Lane. And this is for the erection of 2 3-bedroom dwelling houses. It's currently a row of garages that are owned by the Astor Housing Group. The garages they're not let to anybody. They're not, or they have said in their accompanying statement that they're not actually capable of accommodating cars in them. They're basically too small to park most modern day cars in, and therefore they would like that. They have done an assessment looking at spare bits of land around the area which could be utilised for additional housing, and they have done a pre-application application with the District Council, who have confirmed that it is a suitable infill plot, but the safeguarding of the church wall should be demonstrated, and that to my mind, parking is going to be an issue in this area. There is lots of information in the accompanying documents, and the applicants the agents are saying that 6 vehicles would be displaced, and there would be an available residual unused provision of at least 10 spaces. However, further on in that report, it actually says that the area on which the garages will, the houses will be built, and the associated gardens currently can accommodate up to 30 vehicles. So it's not quite, to me, it's not clear how that will impact on the parking spaces. There have been several objections from residents online about the loss of parking, and I think there is some concern over the design of the buildings and how they will fit into the surrounding area, and particularly adjoining the wall of the churchyard adjoining it. And I think it's also worth pointing out something that Mark mentioned earlier, that the 2 houses that are being provided won't be affordable houses. They will actually be market housing. The Civic Society have also objected to this application. I won't read it all, but they're saying that the proposals cram 2 extremely bland houses onto valuable residential parking space in this area. They create a poor townscape, standing alone in the street scene. As I say, I won't read it all, but I know that you've all been sent it and have read it. But so yes, really over to you for discussion about how you feel about it.
Okay, Paul, and then Mark.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, I totally agree with the Civic Society in terms of its bland design. It's very disappointing. It would be nice if it was, more interesting for sure. Personally, I think I would support this application if it was for social housing. The fact that it isn't social housing is really disappointing. If it's for private sale, then it's not really, Frome isn't really gaining much from it. However, the argument around the parking, I do have a slight issue with, because what residents of that street effectively have at the moment is a free parking space, and the argument is they should continue to have a free parking space. Whereas if Acorn, a housing association, were to build social housing on that space, that would have a social benefit to the wider community. People having free parking spaces doesn't do that. However, if they were prepared to pay money for that parking space, it was cleared and it was turned into a kind of fee-paying parking space, where money would go into the housing association, which would allow them to build social housing elsewhere. Perhaps maybe that would be something that we would support. But as you know, kind of free parking, they're very lucky to have had it up till now, and most people haven't got that. Maybe people need to there needs to be a bit more incentive for people to limit the number of cars they have, perhaps.
Thanks, Paul. Mark.
Paul has pretty well shot my fox with some of the things I was going to say there. But I went there this afternoon. I mean, I know the area very, very well. I live 2 streets away. I know the issues about parking, but I also know the issues about housing. And I was very keen when I saw this, that good, get a couple more social housing in there. I saw the designs and I thought, that's lovely. There's 2 ensuite bathrooms with each house and a lovely garden. So I thought, we're raising the standard of social housing here nicely. Delve into the detail and see that they're being for market rent. We also had this issue with a previous application earlier in the year when asked to try to build on some garages in Green Lane. I get Paul's point that if they could guarantee the money raised by the sale of these houses would be used to build further social housing somewhere else, and that would be acceptable. I don't see who would buy, as a private person, the houses where they are. They will still be in the middle of a car park, even if they have a fence around them. They will still be looking out on poor housing built in the 60s. It's not an attractive view. The whole area needs bringing up. I was really, really surprised to see that they were for market rent. I was hoping there was going to be some more and a better use of the land. They could perhaps get 3 social housing units in there. So I was disappointed. I'm not minded to support it.
Thanks. Yeah. Any other comments from anybody? Paul again.
I just wanted to ask a kind of clarification question, really. I mean, I think, well, as Mark has said, and I said, we're disappointed that these aren't potentially being built for social rent. But is that something that we can object on in planning terms? They're just buildings, effectively. How they're used is not a planning issue. Well, it's not really a planning issue. Would that be right?
Yeah, I mean, it is something that obviously we're disappointed about, but in policy terms, no, it's not really an objection. I think the design, their impact on the surrounding area and perhaps the church wall, which you know, could be dealt with if they amended the plans, and parking. And I know Paul has said that he doesn't agree that there is an objection around the loss of parking, but I think I'd just be interested to check whether other councillors agreed with that as well.
Mark.
What, when we discussed the Green Lane application, what was that? I'm trying to remember why we objected to that, but it was very similar reasons for applying for it. Did we object because it was too close to another building overlooking or something like that? I think it was things that don't really apply here apart from overlooking the churchyard.
There was transport issues as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, and a tree.
Wall.
It was access, really, access, I think, on Green Lane, wasn't it? Dangerous access.
In that case, I'm minded to object to this on the grounds that Rick has raised through the Civic Society about the design, but Jane has come up with 2 figures of loss of parking. Now, if it were social housing, I'd be happier to have houses over car parking, but it will be the upper end. It will be the 30 loss of spaces, having walked around there today and not quite pasted out, but had a good view of what it's going to be. It is going to be the higher end of that. That's 30 cars that are going to be displaced elsewhere onto the very narrow streets around here. And it's always an issue around here. We've had this issue when we've been talking about Sun Street. And so those would be my reasons for objecting.
I tend to agree, and it's not suitable. I guess that's not a planning rule, Jane, but at the end of the day, I mean, we're here to, you know, we're here for Froome, aren't we? And if we don't think it's suitable, we don't think it's suitable, and I think we need to make that point.
Okay, so just so I'm clear that we're
hang on, Lizzie.
Well, I agree with things that have been said so far, particularly around the Civic Society comments and design issues. That then potentially leads Astor, not Acorn, Astor to come back with a design which is more appropriate potentially in future, but it could still be market housing rather than social housing. So we kind of solve one issue, but we still have that overarching thing that we really don't, you know, we'd really like some more social housing, please. So is there something that we can say is not planning in our response, which is that we'd welcome an opportunity to talk to Astor about how they would use the proceeds of the sale of these properties, future properties subject to, et cetera, to either improve the quality of existing social housing in Froome or increase the provision of social housing in Froome. And that conversation is something we'd be very happy to have with them, should this then go ahead. So that the proceeds of it don't just disappear into a corporate pot somewhere else. And, you know, another town gets a bunch of social housing and we sit here going, oh, that was a bit foolish, wasn't it? So just trying to tie it all back together.
So what I wrote before you said that was in addition to reflecting the Civic Society comments regarding design and so on, to say that we're disappointed that these dwellings will not be affordable or social housing. If it is, if it's guaranteed that the profits would be reinvested in affordable stroke social housing in Froome, then that would deal with that element of the objection. But clearly there are still the issues that the Civic Society have raised regarding design, and I'm still not quite clear from councillors how they feel about the loss of parking. Is that something that you would like to object to?
I'd swallow the loss of parking if it was just in favour of social housing, but not as a speculative development.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I agree with Mark.
Okay. So I would
a bit of nodding going on as well. Yeah.
So if I continue that sentence that I just said about the affordable housing, the profits being reinvested in Froome, this, and I add that this would also deal with our concern over the loss of parking. Would that be acceptable? Okay. So is somebody happy to propose that as a response?
Mark is going to propose it. Anyone second it? Andy? And a vote.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
I keep looking at Peter thinking he should be voting. Sorry, Peter. You're right in the middle of my screen. That's the problem. Right.
Okay. I think there was one more.
Flat 1, 2 Bar Street, I think, wasn't it? Number 3.
Yes. Okay. So, as Steve said, this is flat 1, 2 Bar Street. It's actually a listed building, and the application is for internal alterations to the layout and rearrangement. So as part of their accompanying statement, they have said that the works will improve the layout in terms of fire safety, and that the materials that they will use when putting in new partitions, etc., will be of more appropriate materials, and that currently it appears, I think, that there were some alterations done previously that perhaps didn't have listed building consent, and the materials used wouldn't necessarily be what you would expect to see in a listed building. It's having not been interviewed, it's actually quite difficult to offer an opinion. I think the can't recall what the Civic Society said in this case.
The Society had any objection?
They didn't have any objection, but I know that Paul was perhaps not convinced that it would necessarily improve the fire safety, and perhaps Paul would like to just.
Is this in a conservation area? This is in a conservation area?
It is in a conservation area, but most importantly, it's because the building is listed.
Right. So the conservation officer will go and have a good look at what they're looking to do.
Under normal circumstances, they would do a site visit, and if I'm honest, I'm not quite sure how they deal with that at the moment. But I think it would be very difficult for them to make a proper assessment if they're not able to. They may feel that they can do it through photographs. I don't know is the answer.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. So Paul, did you want to?
Yeah. Okay. I kind of raised the comment really because there's obviously, when I looked at the website, there was at least one objection to this from a neighbouring resident. And I, looking at the application, I was really confused and not really sure what was going on. But what appears to be the case is that whatever the changes are, they're kind of, the justification is to do with fire regulations or whatever. But I couldn't see what was wrong with the existing layout from a fire regulations point of view. The kitchen had a separate access, a door which you could close if there was a fire in there. So there was a problem. It was not a problem to escape from the living room, etc. So I couldn't really see what they were benefiting from. But the other thing was that also, as far as I could see, that part of the plan is to kind of grab a bit of space from a communal landing. So I kind of wonder what's the kind of ownership issues, etc. there. You know, what's the maybe it's the same owner that owns the flat and the communal space. I couldn't really understand it. So I'm not saying that I'm not objecting necessarily. I'm just a bit confused by it, I guess, really, in some ways.
Jane?
I think the ownership certificates implied that it was within the ownership of the applicant, but it's a good point, and certainly one that we can ask, that we can make reference to it in our response. And if that was the case, should we be not objecting, subject to the ownership of that communal landing or is that not how you're feeling about this application?
No, I mean, I think that's fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I'd like to see a bit more clarity, but it's a minor point in some ways, and I think really, yeah.
Okay, so is somebody happy to propose that as a response? Steve?
I will. Someone second it, please. Rich, and a vote on that. Right. Andy, you're...
Oh yeah, Andy is abstaining because he's declared an interest.
Excellent, thank you.
The other one you mentioned earlier that I had written down, Steve, was Broadway. I don't know if that was, I can't remember that. It was 334, I think.
334, yes, 119.
Because there's a couple of objections to that.
That's right. I think there were 2 objections.
Just bear with me a moment. Yes, so this application is 119 Broadway, Frome. The description is for the demolition of the existing single-storey extension and the erection of a 2-storey and single-storey rear and side extension. It is actually quite a big extension. However, having looked at the site plan and the block plan, it does sit within quite a large plot. I must admit, when I looked at it, I couldn't see that there would necessarily be any overlooking or overshadowing, but obviously the people who live next door will have a far better impression of that. And yes, there are 2 objections that reflect that on Mendip's website at the moment. Yes, I mean, you know, you have looked at the plans. I don't know whether or not you felt that there would actually be any overlooking or overshadowing as suggested by the objectors.
Any comments? Not really. Lizzie.
I was just getting my bearings on Google Maps, that's why I disappeared for a moment, because it's like, otherwise you can see what I'm looking at on my screen. And it does look like it's on a kind of triangular plot, and then there's an alleyway which leads to the houses behind. And Jane, I think I'll take your judgment on whether you think it kind of fits that space. And I think there were also concerns about tree with a preservation order in the garden. Is that the right one?
Yes, yeah.
So I think we had a previous application for that, I think, didn't we?
Yeah, clarity on that, and yeah, if you've had a look and you think it's okay for the space, then I'll trust your judgment.
It does look like that on plan, but as I say, you know, very often it's not until that you actually go and visit the site that you do get a clearer picture, which is what the planning officer will find a mechanism to do somehow.
It's a mark on one of his walks.
Yes, yeah. I mean, but perhaps the thing to do here is to say no objection. However, we would like the objections from the neighbours to be taken into consideration. Did Andy have his hand up, or?
No.
Oh.
Did you want to say something, Andy, or were you just sorting your... No.
Sorry, me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we thought you had your hand up or so.
Oh no, I was pressing this. I was pressing the screen to bring up the map and the plans. Sorry.
Ah, fair enough. Yeah. Okay, Jay. Yeah, makes sense.
So is somebody happy to propose that as a response?
Rich. I'll second. And a vote, please.
And that's unanimous, thank you. And unless anybody wants to raise any others for discussion, I don't think, I think the rest that we were happy to go with no objection.
No objection. Mm-hmm. So can we just vote on that as well? I think it's, yeah.
As a whole, yeah.
If someone could propose that all the other applications we have no objection on, thanks, Anita. Andy second, and if we could all vote on that.
That's unanimous as well.
Great.
Thank you.
Needs to get out in front of 2 hours. Excellent. Thanks, everybody. Hannah, when's the next meeting? I haven't got a note of it.
6th of August.
What was that?
6th of August.
6th of August. Thank you. Great. Hang on. Right. So, without
Very much. Thank you.
further ado, if there's nothing else.
Well
Thank
done,
you,
everybody.
Steve. Thank you,
Thank you
Jane.
very much.